The darkness of that summer night in Gresham, Oregon, would forever be etched in the memories of those who lived through it. What began as an ordinary evening in a quiet apartment complex would soon transform into a nightmare that shook an entire community to its core. The small apartment sat on the ground floor, unremarkable from the outside. Within its walls lived a young mother who had spent years building a life for herself and her daughter against overwhelming odds. But on this particular night, everything she had worked for would be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. As midnight approached, the peaceful silence shattered. The sounds that followed were the stuff of horror films. Screaming pierced the night air. The unmistakable crash of furniture being overturned echoed through thin walls. Desperate pleas for help carried into neighboring units. And yet, incredibly, not a single person reached for their phone to call the authorities. The residents of the complex would later struggle to explain their inaction. Some said they thought it was just another domestic dispute. Others admitted they simply turned up their televisions to drown out the disturbing noises. One by one, they made the choice to do nothing, to look away, to hope someone else would intervene. When law enforcement finally arrived at the scene in the early morning hours, they found themselves confronting carnage that would haunt even the most veteran investigators. The apartment's interior told a story of unimaginable violence. This was no random burglary gone wrong. Nothing of value had been taken. The placement of evidence, the nature of the attack, the sheer brutality of what had occurred, all pointed to something deeply personal. To understand the tragedy that befell her, we must first understand the woman at the center of this story. Annastasia Hester, though everyone simply called her Annie, was a lifelong resident of Gresham. Her roots ran deep in this Oregon community, and those roots had weathered many storms. Annie's early years were marked by profound loss. While still navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence, her father passed away. The grief that followed reshaped her family dynamic entirely. Her mother remarried, and Annie found herself adjusting to a new stepfather, learning to rebuild what had been broken. These formative experiences with loss and adaptation would shape the woman she became, forging in her a resilience that would define her entire adult life. Those who crossed paths with Annie invariably described her in similar terms: reliable, strong, unshakable when it mattered most. She possessed a work ethic that impressed employers and colleagues alike, coupled with natural leadership abilities that seemed effortless. Whether organizing a project or simply helping a friend in need, Annie stepped up without hesitation. But beyond her professional capabilities and dependable nature, Annie harbored a passionate creative side. She found joy and escape in the world of gaming, particularly role-playing adventures where she could step into different personas and explore fantastic realms. The local gaming community knew her well. She frequented hobby shops, attended cosplay events, and immersed herself in these alternate realities with genuine enthusiasm. It was through this shared hobby that fate, or what seemed like fate at the time, brought Matthew Hester back into her orbit. Their history stretched back to 1999, a time when Matt was still bound by his first marriage. Life pulled them apart for years, sending them down separate paths. But a chance meeting at a local game store reignited a connection. By the time they reconnected, Matt's first marriage had ended in divorce. What started as friendly conversation between fellow gaming enthusiasts gradually evolved into something more. Romance blossomed, or at least what they believed was romance. In 2008, Annie and Matt made their relationship official, exchanging vows and building what they hoped would be a lasting partnership. 3 years into their marriage, in 2011, their daughter Alice entered the world. For Annie, motherhood brought a profound sense of purpose. Finally, she had created the family she had longed for since losing her father all those years ago. The little girl became the center of her universe, the reason she pushed herself harder than ever before. But happiness proved fleeting. Just 12 months after Alice's birth, Annie's world crumbled once again. She discovered that Matt had been unfaithful, repeating the same pattern of betrayal that had destroyed his first marriage. The revelation cut deep, not just because of the infidelity itself, but because of what it represented, a fundamental lack of respect and commitment. Annie tried to salvage the relationship. She wanted Alice to grow up in an intact family, to avoid the pain of divorce. She attempted to forgive, to move forward, to rebuild trust. But Matt continued lying, making promises he had no intention of keeping. Eventually, Annie reached a breaking point. She recognized that staying meant teaching her daughter that this behavior was acceptable, and that was a lesson she refused to impart. The divorce proceedings began, and Annie embarked on the challenging journey of single motherhood. She found a modest one-bedroom apartment, small but affordable. Without hesitation, she gave Alice the bedroom, claiming privacy and comfort for her daughter were paramount. For herself, Annie set up a simple mattress in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary, or so she told herself. The financial reality of single parenthood hit hard. One job wasn't enough, so Annie worked two. During daylight hours, she supervised an after-school program, caring for children whose parents worked late. When that shift ended, she headed downtown to a call center, spending evenings handling customer inquiries and complaints. The exhaustion was relentless, but Annie never complained. Her dedication earned recognition, and she was eventually promoted to a management position. Shadows of conflict. Despite holding a managerial position, Annie's financial struggles persisted. The court had ordered Matt to pay child support, but those payments arrived sporadically at best. Matt jumped from job to job, each transition providing him a convenient excuse for missed payments. The burden of providing for Alice fell almost entirely on Annie's shoulders, and she carried it without complaint, pouring every dollar and every ounce of energy into ensuring her daughter had what she needed. Eventually, Matt moved on romantically, marrying a woman named Angela. For Alice's sake, Annie maintained a civil relationship with both of them. She understood that her daughter needed stability, not conflict. The two families even shared occasional dinners and outings, presenting a united front for the child who connected them all. On the surface, everything appeared amicable. Throughout this period, Annie never lost touch with her creative spirit. Despite exhaustion and financial pressure, she made time for the small touches that brought joy to her life and others. During the Christmas season, she crafted handmade decorations for friends and family, pouring hours into personalized gifts that money couldn't buy. She designed custom greeting cards featuring photographs of Alice, capturing moments of childhood that passed too quickly. On weekends, when Alice stayed with her father, Annie transformed her free time into additional income. She took freelance gigs painting faces at community events and birthday parties. For Annie, staying busy served dual purposes: financial survival and creative expression. She refused to let circumstances crush her spirit, finding ways to maintain her identity beyond simply being a struggling single mother. The summer of 2016 should have been just another season in Annie's ongoing journey. Instead, it became the final chapter of her life, ending in violence that shocked everyone who knew her story. When officers responded to the early morning call at Annie's apartment, they encountered a scene that would be seared into their memories forever. The brutality was immediately apparent, impossible to process, even for investigators who had witnessed countless crime scenes throughout their careers. The point of entry told its own disturbing story. Someone had approached Alice's bedroom window from outside, targeting the ground floor unit with clear intent. The air conditioning unit mounted in the window had been forcibly removed. A block or similar object had been used to prop the window open wide enough for a person to climb through. This was no impulsive act. Someone had come prepared. Curiously, when investigators approached from the front, they found the door unlocked. Had the killer left through the front after entering through the window? The layout of the crime scene suggested exactly that scenario. Inside, the apartment presented a confusing picture. Most of the living space remained undisturbed. No drawers had been ransacked. No valuables were missing. The television, electronics, and what little jewelry Annie owned all remained in place. This immediately ruled out robbery as a motive. Whoever had broken in that night hadn't come for possessions. They had come for Annie herself. The blood evidence painted a horrifying timeline. Analysts determined that Annie had likely been asleep when the attack began, vulnerable and unsuspecting. She had awakened to find herself fighting for her life. In those first terrifying moments, she had tried to run, making it nearly to the front door before being overtaken. She never made it outside, never reached safety, never escaped the nightmare unfolding in her own home. The medical examiner's report would later document over 60 stab wounds covering Annie's body. The concentration on her chest and head indicated the attacker's clear intent to kill, but the violence extended beyond murder into the realm of pure sadism. The killer had attempted to decapitate her, sawing at her neck with determined brutality. And then there was the carving, those 3 cryptic letters VXV etched into her shoulder. Investigators debated the meaning endlessly. Was it a gang symbol, a personal message, someone's initials, or perhaps a deliberate misdirection designed to send police chasing false leads? Without context, the letters remained an enigma, one more piece of a puzzle that refused to come together. The weapons told their own story. 3 knives lay scattered across the blood-soaked carpet. 2 had been taken from Annie's own kitchen block, grabbed opportunistically during the struggle. The 3rd was a folding knife, clearly brought to the scene by the attacker. This detail suggested premeditation, someone coming prepared to kill. Bloody footprints tracked across the floor, leading toward the exit. Investigators photographed and measured each impression, hoping the tread pattern might eventually identify a specific shoe and, by extension, the killer. The prints suggested either a single attacker or possibly multiple assailants, though the evidence remained ambiguous. By extraordinary fortune, Alice had not been home that fateful night. She was staying with her father and Angela, safe from the horror unfolding at her mother's apartment. Had she been sleeping in her bedroom as usual, investigators believed she would likely have become a second victim. The killer had entered through her window after all. The thought of what might have happened haunted everyone involved in the case. As investigators canvassed the apartment complex, the testimony from neighbors proved both helpful and deeply disturbing. Multiple residents reported hearing the commotion. One described screams that began around 11:15 in the evening. Others mentioned sounds of crashing furniture, raised voices, doors slamming with force. Several heard what they described as groaning or moaning sounds that continued well past 1 in the morning. One neighbor admitted something particularly chilling. The noises had been so disturbing, so persistent, that they had deliberately turned up their television volume to mask the sounds. They wanted to drown out whatever was happening, to pretend it wasn't occurring just feet away. When asked why they hadn't called for help, the neighbor had no adequate answer. In fact, despite multiple people hearing clear signs of distress over several hours, not one single neighbor dialed emergency services. The only person who made that call was Annie herself. At 3 in the morning, barely able to breathe, her body ravaged by dozens of stab wounds, Annie somehow found the strength to reach her phone and dial 911. It was an act of remarkable courage and determination. Even as life ebbed away, she refused to surrender without trying every possible avenue for survival and justice. The timeline was particularly horrifying. If neighbors heard the first disturbances around 11 p.m. and Annie didn't call until 3 a.m., that meant the attack had lasted approximately 4 hours. 4 hours of sustained violence, torture, and terror. The assault hadn't been quick. It had been prolonged, deliberate, and sadistic. Detectives found themselves facing a challenging investigation. They had no clear suspect, no obvious motive, and no explanation for the cryptic letters carved into Annie's body. The only certainty was that someone had wanted her dead, badly enough to spend hours ensuring it happened. Following standard procedure, investigators began by examining Annie's closest relationships. In most murders, particularly ones this personal and violent, the perpetrator is someone known to the victim. They contacted Matt, Hester, and Angela, informing them of Annie's death and requesting they come to the station for interviews. Matt's initial response struck detectives as oddly detached. He expressed no particular shock or grief at learning his ex-wife had been brutally murdered. Instead, his immediate focus centered on custody arrangements and what would happen to Alice. When asked about potential enemies or threats Annie might have faced, Matt claimed ignorance. According to him, their relationship was distant but manageable, with minimal contact beyond matters concerning their daughter. Matt and Angela both provided the same alibi. They insisted they had been home all evening with Alice and Angela's 3 children from her previous marriage. The family had spent the evening playing video games together before going to bed around 10 p.m. Matt stated that Angela had been beside him all night, and she corroborated this completely. Angela added that she was an extremely light sleeper, making it impossible for Matt to have left without her noticing. Despite their consistent story, detectives noted Matt's demeanor remained concerning. He showed little emotional response to the graphic details of Annie's murder. His questions centered almost exclusively on practical matters, specifically gaining full custody of Alice. When describing his feelings toward his ex-wife, Matt characterized them as indifferent, stating he had preferred to have as little interaction with her as possible. Matt admitted to the infidelity that had ended their marriage, but attempted to reframe it. He claimed they had maintained an open relationship, suggesting Annie had also explored romantic connections with others. According to Matt, Annie had been involved with a couple she met at a pirate-themed role-playing event, and that relationship had been polyamorous in nature. Investigators tracked down this couple quickly. After thorough interviews and verification of their whereabouts on the night of the murder, they were completely cleared of involvement. Physically, Matt presented complications for the investigation. He relied on a cane for mobility and walked with a pronounced limp. He clearly suffered from health conditions that limited his physical capabilities. Given the ferocity of the attack, the sheer number of stab wounds, and the physical strength required to inflict such damage, detectives questioned whether Matt could have committed this crime alone, or at all. Angela's interview mirrored Matt's account almost word for word. She confirmed they had been in bed by 10 p.m., scrolling on their phones until falling asleep. She described their household as chaotic but routine: 4 children, a dog, and even tenants renting space on the property, including the garage. That garage tenant, a close friend of Angela's named Karina, provided additional support for their alibi. She told police she was certain Matt and Angela had remained home all night. The garage was close enough to the driveway that any vehicle departing would have been clearly audible, and she had heard nothing unusual. Both Matt and Angela voluntarily surrendered their cell phones for examination. The initial analysis revealed nothing immediately incriminating. No suspicious text messages, no damning search history, no evidence that pointed directly to involvement in Annie's murder. Without concrete proof linking them to the crime, detectives had no choice but to release them while the investigation continued. Meanwhile, the search for answers expanded geographically. Law enforcement deployed search and rescue teams equipped with specially trained dogs to comb through nearby areas. Helicopters circled overhead, searching for discarded evidence or anything that might provide a breakthrough. The focus included the Springwater Trail, a path that ran near Annie's apartment complex. This trail had developed a reputation as a gathering point for transient populations. Drug activity was common, and residents in the surrounding neighborhoods frequently expressed concerns about safety. Many locals theorized that Annie might have encountered a dangerous drifter, someone passing through who had targeted her apartment randomly. However, as investigators dug deeper into Annie's personal life, particularly the custody battle with Matt, this random attack theory seemed increasingly unlikely. The appearance of peaceful co-parenting between Annie, Matt, and Angela was beginning to unravel under scrutiny. Everything had shifted when Angela entered Matt's life. What began innocuously enough, with Angela simply renting a room in Matt's house, quickly developed into a romantic relationship. From that point forward, tensions with Annie had escalated dramatically and continuously. According to multiple sources, Angela had strong opinions about Matt maintaining any communication with his ex-wife. She reportedly discouraged contact, creating friction whenever Annie needed to discuss matters related to Alice. Simultaneously, Matt became increasingly insistent on obtaining full custody of his daughter, a dramatic shift from the shared arrangement that had been working. The custody dispute had eventually landed in family court. Just 1 month before Annie's murder, a judge had issued a ruling. Full custody of Alice was awarded to Annie, a decision that represented a complete victory for her and a devastating loss for Matt and Angela. But the financial implications were even more severe. The court ordered Matt to pay over $13,000 in back child support that had accumulated during his periods of unemployment and job changes. Additionally, he was responsible for nearly $30,000 in legal fees related to the custody proceedings. For a couple with no steady employment, these figures were catastrophic. The reality of Matt and Angela's financial situation was stark. Neither held a job. Neither had income from traditional employment. The court orders demanded payment they simply could not provide, and Annie had emerged victorious on every front. Detectives couldn't ignore the obvious question: how did Matt and Angela plan to satisfy these court-ordered financial obligations? Matt spent his days immersed in creative pursuits. He devoted countless hours to writing elaborate fantasy stories and designing intricate role-playing games. He maintained a YouTube channel with Angela where they shared their fictional worlds with a small but dedicated audience. While these activities brought personal satisfaction, they generated virtually no income. When pressed about their finances, Matt and Angela explained they were full-time caregivers for their children. They claimed the kids struggled with various mental health conditions requiring constant supervision and care. Because of these circumstances, they received government benefits and financial assistance that supported the household. This explanation prompted investigators to speak with Angela's ex-husband, Aaron. What he revealed added disturbing new dimensions to the case. According to Aaron, Angela's obsession with diagnosing mental health conditions in children had been a primary factor in ending their marriage. Aaron described a pattern where Angela constantly insisted their children needed psychiatric medications, even when medical professionals disagreed with her assessments. He characterized her behavior as dangerous and unnecessary, driven more by her own needs than the children's actual conditions. In his view, Angela sought diagnoses that would qualify the family for additional government benefits and support. More alarmingly, Aaron revealed that Angela's focus had eventually shifted to include Alice, Annie's daughter. Angela had become convinced that Alice suffered from bipolar disorder, a diagnosis Annie vehemently rejected. Annie had grown increasingly fearful that Angela was attempting to use Alice's name to claim additional benefits fraudulently. Mental health professionals later confirmed Annie's concerns were well-founded. A licensed psychologist explained that labeling typical childhood behaviors as serious mental illness could cause significant harm to a child's development. Furthermore, official diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder didn't even exist for children under the age of 6, making Angela's claimed diagnosis medically impossible. The conflict escalated further when Child Protective Services received a report accusing Annie of child neglect. Annie was devastated by the allegation, though she had no idea who had filed the complaint. The investigation was swift, and the case was quickly dismissed as completely unfounded. Nevertheless, the emotional toll on Annie was severe. In an email to a trusted friend, she wrote words that would later haunt everyone who read them. "I just don't understand what I did to deserve all of this." For investigators, the motive was crystallizing. Custody, jealousy, and money, 3 powerful forces that might drive someone to murder, but motive alone wouldn't secure a conviction. They needed physical evidence, witnesses, forensics, something concrete that would hold up in court. Detectives brought Matt and Angela back for additional questioning. Matt made a surprising gesture, voluntarily removing his shirt to show investigators his torso. No scratches, no defensive wounds, no marks of any kind. In a case where the victim had clearly fought desperately for survival, investigators expected the killer to bear visible injuries. Yet Matt insisted he had nothing to hide. Angela's second interview introduced contradictions. She admitted that around 3 a.m. on the night of the murder, she had actually been awake. She claimed she'd taken the dogs outside, then suddenly became violently ill, so sick that Matt had to help her shower and change clothes. This new timeline placed both of them awake and active at the exact hour Annie called 911. Without hard evidence, detectives released them again but launched covert surveillance. The footage was revealing. Matt moved easily, carrying heavy bags, doing yard work, walking without his cane. The frailty he'd displayed during interrogation appeared to be performance, even more damning. A neighbor's security camera captured a vehicle leaving Matt and Angela's driveway just before 1 a.m., heading toward Annie's apartment. The breakthrough finally came through forensic science. DNA testing on the knives from the crime scene revealed undeniable results. The blood and DNA matched Angela. In October 2017, over a year after Annie's murder, police arrested Angela in Pocatello, Idaho. She was charged with aggravated murder and theft. Despite her angry protests, the evidence was overwhelming. Matt eventually admitted Angela had come home covered in blood that night. He claimed he'd only helped her clean up, though he also acknowledged they had previously discussed killing Annie. Google search records revealed Angela had looked up a location in Mount Hood National Forest days after the murder. Detectives found a boot buried there matching the bloody print from the crime scene. A diver recovered clothing belonging to Angela nearby. In 2020, Angela pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving life in prison with possible parole after 25 years. Matt pleaded guilty in 2021 to solicitation of murder and hindering prosecution, receiving just 56 months. Alice was adopted by Annie's mother, finding safety within the family Annie had always fought to protect. Angela's children entered foster care. Annie's legacy endures not as a victim, but as a fighter who never gave up, even in her darkest hour. Her strength, resilience, and love for her daughter remain an inspiration to all who knew her story.